Welcome back to Mark Holbit's vlog, everyone. Thanks for joining in on this beautiful, somewhat sunny, a little frosty kind of a day here in winter in Edmonton. I definitely want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and it's right there. It's the F Type, and a lot of you guys saw my last live stream, and I talked about some of the things that make and warrant a real performance, a real driver's car. What are those elements that make a car a real driver's car? And then, of course, I was just asking your guys' thoughts on specific examples, cars that you think are really, really great driver's cars. And when I say driver's cars, every car is a driver's car. But the reality is not every car engages the driving enthusiast. And that's what the F Type does very, very well. So I want to talk about that today and talk about some of those key elements, because there's lots of sports cars and there's lots of cars that seem or are intended to be sporty and for the driver, but they don't turn out all that well in execution. For example, Lamborghini Gallardo, great car, looks great, sounds great. So from those oral senses, it really gives you that. But it has a really terrible It actually has a very terrible gearbox, and even more importantly, it steers poorly at lower speeds. And there's all kinds of arguments that Lamborghinis, especially at lower speeds, aren't necessarily the best performance cars. But today I want to talk really specifically about the F Type. And in fact, what are those elements that makes the F Type, and truly I do believe it is one of today's best performance and drivers cars available in the market today. What are those things? And I don't mean it from a styling standpoint, because we all know that they look great, and there's a lot of great cars that just have the look. They have the style elements. But are they really that great to drive? Some yes, some no. And the F Type clearly has all the style going for it. But what are the things that comes out of this car, my F Type R here, that makes it a true driver's car, that brings and delivers on all those elements that really engages the senses and makes you as the driver excited to get behind the wheel? Well, let's talk about this, and let's just get rolling right into it. So the first element that clearly defines whether it's a true driver's performance enthusiast type car is what's under the hood right there. Well, let's take a look. Okay, let's pop the hood, and it's what's underneath the hood that matters the most. And of course, any true driver's performance car has to have something hot under the hood. Now, it doesn't always have to be like this. What we have here is a 5-liter V8. It's supercharged, and it produces 550 horsepower. Some say 542, whatever. It produces a significant amount of power. It makes a great sound, and it produces the power, puts it down, but it also gives you that extra supercharger whine, and as well, it just gives you that thrust. When you have forced induction, turbocharging, supercharging, that's always more intended, in my opinion, two ways. Number one is efficiency. A lot of car manufacturers today are just going with bigger engines yesterday, smaller engines today with a turbocharger on it. For example, the AMG C63S, have you heard? Previously went from a 6.2 liter naturally aspirated. Then they went to this twin turbo 4-liter V8, and now they're going to a 2-liter turbocharged as well as hybrid override. So they're moving away from the idea of big engines, powerful engines, to smaller, more highly strung engines. But here we still have what's left of a dying breed. Larger displacement engine with a supercharger really equates to a lot of power. That's really what it means to have a car that's a driver's car. It has to have that bare fundamental. Whether you're talking about the Subaru WRX STI that has a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that's relatively high strung and performance oriented. A lot of people like those. We talk about the Porsche. They're either race engines like a GT3, so they're really high strung, high revving, or they're a twin turbo and they're extremely fast when you let them run. So at the end of the day, any driver's car has to have an engine that makes down performance numbers as well as has high revving capability, massive power, torque, or just ultimate thrust, and brings a certain dynamic. Driving a car like this has none of that. This is reliable, check. Good on fuel, check. But there's nothing about that engine that's going to make you too excited about getting behind the wheel. So that's an example of a non-enthusiast vehicle. Let's close that up. Just like that. Now, when you start adding power, you obviously need to slow the vehicle down because it's going to pick up speed a lot quicker. So then we take an example of the same brand. We have a Jaguar, we have an F-Pace, but that's the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engine in there, and we have the 5-liter V8 here. So it's a great point of reference. So let's talk about brakes, because that's the next part. Sporting intentions. If you have big brakes, you need those sporting capabilities. But let's look right here, for example, we can take a look, and what we might have is in behind there, we may have a relatively small brake caliper, may have 1 or 2 pot piston caliper there, as well as the disc. And so here, let's just roughly measure that. We run that to there. We go right from there, from that disc to this, and you're talking about approximately 11-inch disc right there, if we're being honest. Then over on the F Type, much bigger caliper there, and 4 piston pot caliper, and we're gonna run that to here, and we're gonna look at, we're probably about a 15-inch disc, roughly. So you can ask yourself, why would you put bigger brakes on something like this? Just for looks? No. The sporting intentions and the capabilities and performance of this vehicle are far higher than this vehicle, and therefore, if you get up to speed quickly, you want to be able to scrub that speed quickly too. So that's why typically cars, when you have different variants within the same range and the models, and the high performance versions typically have larger brakes. So bigger brakes, bigger, more powerful engines are usually to follow suit. We also can't forget about suspension systems. This is going to ride a lot more luxuriously, a lot more fluffy. It's going to be easier. It's going to be a much easier car to live with on a daily basis. The F Type, for example, or any other sports car. Have you ridden in a modern day Corvette lately? How about a Mustang or a Shelby GT500? Those cars are going to have a really, really strong suspension to allow the car to handle like it's on rails. So clearly, a car that handles well, brakes well, and has the great performance to giddy up and go are clearly all fundamental elements to ensuring that you have yourself a great driver's car. So the F Types generally have all of those checks, all those boxes. What else does it have? Let's look. All right, so let's go inside. So what does the car inside have that would imply that this is a performance car? No, it's not about power seats, and it's not about the Meridian sound system. No, it's none of that. Power windows, that wouldn't imply this is a performance car. It's a luxury car, yes. Has some great touches and details, makes it very cool. Jaguar is printed on everything. But just look inside. A car that's generally rated for performance driving is gonna have deep bolstered seats. So if you're looking into a car and you have seats that look a lot more like this that are gonna hug you in there, both bottom as well as the top, generally that's going to imply that the car has sporting intentions. If you have a car that seats with basically flat across the back, that's probably more like what you're gonna find in a Honda like that, where it's more comfortable, relaxed, it's not gonna throw you around. So when you're carving out the canyons, like you do in an F Type such as this, when you're ripping on it, it's meant to actually keep you in the seats. So generally, if you see a car with these types of seat bolstering, you're likely going to be into something that has a little more sporting intentions. Other things, sometimes holy shit handles, and yet others are often performance cars are really designed to make the driver feel like they're in a cocoon. So they're in a position where they're ready for action. And that's exactly what the F Type does. It brings all of those controls, as you can see, to the driver. The driver doesn't have to reach across anywhere. The controls in some cases are exclusive to the driver, and the passenger has limited access to some of the driving components. So it's all about the cockpit. I mean, after all, let's face it, if you're in an airplane or a jet, either the pilot or co-pilot, which are both intended to take the controls by the helm, have everything at their fingertips, at a finger's reach. And of course, nothing more. They don't want the passengers being able to reach to any of those controls now, do they? But how about some more examples? Sometimes you get in generic cars like this, although this one has a digital display, but a lot of times you get into more generic cars, Toyota Corollas, and other generic garden variety cars are missing one key element on the dash cluster. Right here. What we're looking at is a big tachometer. Why is that? Well, because cars that generally performance oriented, such as the F Type right there, have these kind of gauges available. They don't just have the speedo, but they'll have the tachometer. Now, tachometer isn't exclusive to high performance cars. No, by no means. It's quite frankly, it's a very garden variety gauge by today's day and age. However, it's like golfing, right? Not everybody who golfs is a golfer, but every golfer golfs. Right? So at the end of the day, it really boils down to some cars have it, some cars don't, but virtually every performance car has to have that element because you need to see what you're doing. As you're controlling the engine speed, it gives you the optimization of how you're pulling gears and how you're driving and controlling the engine output. Of course, the higher the revs, the more power, and away you go. So the F Type is no different. It has all those elements. Of course, right here is the other thing. What are we looking at here? That's the paddle shifters. We have up, we have down. And all that ties in to this little rigmarole right here. And what we're dealing with is the shifter controller here. Now, this is planted to a ZF 8-speed automatic transmission. Now, I'll be the first to admit, and I think a lot of you guys would agree with that an automatic slush box isn't generally the epitome of a performance car. As a matter of fact, there was a time when you'd say, if it had an automatic transmission, it's not worthy of name of a performance car. But things have changed, and they've changed a lot. Traditionally, if you didn't have a stick shift or a manual or a 5 or 6-speed manual gearbox, you wouldn't even consider it being a performance car. Then, of course, along comes the double clutch gearboxes. Cars like Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, and then, of course, it started hitting the mainstream. Audi started putting them in cars, even BMW and some of the M cars started to move into a double clutch gearbox setup where you pull a gear and then the next upstream gear is ready to go already. So you pull second, third's already lined up because there's 2 different gear sets. Dual clutch transmissions are meant for lightning speed shifting, but they are heavy and they're expensive when they break. And that's what is going on with here. We're talking about an automatic torque converter type transmission. And as I said, I've never been the biggest fan, but even performance car manufacturers like BMW have realized that the automatic transmission in this new ZF 8-speed automatic is so damn good that you can get next to lightning speed shifting, such as you get in a dual clutch transmission, but you'll do it in a smaller, lighter package, and that means you can fit it in better chassis designs, and as well, it's more reliable, more comfortable when you want it to be. It can be as aggressive as when you want it to be. But if it all breaks, it's going to be cheaper to fix. So the ZF 8-speed in this car is just that good. It is truly designed for the performance drivers in mind. And same with many of the modern day BMWs. They now use the ZF 8-speed instead of the older manual or the dual clutches in some of their cars, and they haven't looked back. And I don't think many customers are missing it either. Now, there's another component with a lot of modern day performance cars that are truly going to entice you as the driver and make you feel even further engaged. For example, when we're talking about a car like this, you can go on the dash and it'll have different driving modes. And sometimes you can go eco to different modes, performance mode, sport mode, and it doesn't make a hill of beans a difference. But then we have the M5 right here. It's the V10, and pardon all the junk on top, but the V10 engine is awesome car. Why? Because this truly is a Jekyll and Hyde. With the stroke of the M button, you can literally change this car from 400 naturally aspirated raging horsepower up to 507 horsepower at the flip of a switch. It changes the dynamics, the active seat bolsters go, heads-up display activate. You get a much sharper handling. You can feel the suspension and the differential dial it in. The car feels much firmer. Throttle response is just crisp, and the sound is just crazy. But the same can be said for this car. A lot of modern day cars now that are performance oriented do more than just give you a nice little sport button and say, hey, make you all feel all warm and fuzzy and hey, I've got a race mode, I'm gonna go racing. That's not really the intent with a lot of cars, unfortunately. But with the F Type, it does really change the dynamics of the drive. Now, it doesn't do what the M5 does and actually provide a huge amount of output change. No, that stays the same. It's supercharged. You don't uncouple anything. It doesn't deregulate or derate the power in any way, but it does some other things. For example, when you hit this, you go there, now you got that light, and now you'll notice your gauges are all red. So it gives you the visual sensation of something going on, but all of a sudden hitting this, and all of a sudden now I can actually hear the exhaust. So what it does is it permanently opens up the exhaust valves behind me there, and you could just hear it even idling. It's almost like you cut out the catalytic converters is what it sounds like on a regular car, and it's sitting there and it's like chuggling. You can actually hear it. Now you don't have to get that full bore. You can actually turn that off, and you can use the exhaust mode instead, and then with that mode, nothing really changes performance-wise, but it does open up the valve baffles much earlier at about 2,000 RPM, then you get the sound. So performance cars do put out the sound often. Cars that are whisper quiet is a problem. Think about what Ferrari's been going through. Their latest V8 cars, they went after the 458 Italia, then they went to a 488, and that was one of the biggest complaints, was the lack of the proper sound, because they went turbocharging, and turbos tend to muffle the exhaust a bunch. Then they went with the F8, even faster and better car, arguably in a performance standpoint, but it gets too quiet. And that was one of the biggest complaints they had, that customers had, was the lack of noise that Ferrari typically puts out. The SF90, same storyline. It's a twin turbo V8. Same thing, it's very muffled. And unless you do a full cat bypass, you're missing out on that. But the F Type here being supercharged,
There's nothing restricted in the exhaust system like in a turbo engine. Superchargers just put pressurized air to the intake directly via belt or a drive of some type, and then that gives you the power. So the exhaust is as open as you want it to be, and you can make these things very, very aggressive. Yes, you put it in the dynamic mode and it gets ornery. So anybody who really does appreciate the driving experience loves the feel of that throttle response, the big brakes when you need it, the handling that keeps you in the corners, keeps you real tight, the seats, of course, that keep you hugged in there. They like all of those senses, but when you're throttling in and accelerating, you like to hear those sounds too. That's why cars like Lamborghini and the V12s and the V10s and the Huracans and the Aventadors are legendary for some of their sound effects. That's why it's going to be an absolute horrific situation once and if they actually have to let that go, because it's the sounds that they've always provided, and that gives you that whole sensation of driving a performance car. That's the thing with this new Ferrari 296 that we drove this last summer. Was one of the examples. They said they actually had called it the Piccolo V12 because Ferrari intentionally tried to funnel in sounds and give it that different resonant to simulate and almost sound a lot like the V12. They called it the baby V12 engine. So it actually does sound better than the previous V8s, in fact, because that is a priority for a lot of people who love the performance driving attributes.
All right.
Okay, we're just gonna go for a drive now, enjoy some of this snowy weather, and then I hope you guys will drop a line. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the performance car attributes, and did I miss something in the F Type that does truly cater to the driving perspective or the driving attitude? And did I miss something else? I don't know. Let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear it, everybody. Here, I'm just enjoying a great afternoon out in the F Type, going for a spin. If you are not currently a subscriber, I'd suggest you may want to do that. This is truly about living the lifestyle. Remember, life's too short to drive boring cars, so let's all enjoy it. See you next time. Bye-bye.